Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you and yours are doing as well as possible given current circumstances. My name is Luna, and I serve on the Racial Justice and Public Policy team at YWCA Minneapolis as the Race Equity and Public Policy Strategist. Some of us on the team are going to take a little time and tell you about our work. As you know, the mission at YWCA Minneapolis is to eliminate racism, empower women, and there's a third part too, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. You might be familiar with a few pieces of our community-facing racial justice work, like our community workshops that happen once a month on topics like Racism 101, intersectionality, or elections. Or maybe you've heard of our Racial Justice Facilitator program. This is a program that trains volunteers to become YWCA Minneapolis racial justice facilitators. They are then the same members of the community who lead roundtable discussions at It's Time to Talk every fall. You may have heard about one of our fantastic facilitators, Melissa, who also happens to be our Volunteer of the Year. She's one of many who end up serving as roundtable dialogue facilitators at It's Time to Talk, one of our signature events. Every fall, over 1,000 people gather at the Minneapolis Convention Center to hear from an expert keynote speaker about a topic of racial justice and then engage in dialogue around race. We know that one of the very first steps to tackling inequities in our society is naming and speaking about race and racial injustice and how it permeates all facets of our lives. It's Time to Talk has been happening for 17 years, and a couple of years ago, participants started asking what the next step was and how they could become further involved in work for racial justice. It became the catalyst for new signature events coming out of YWCA Minneapolis called It's Time to Act. It's Time to Act forum events are smaller, more focused events that happen in the springtime on specific topics of systemic oppression. Participants again come together to hear from a speaker or a panel about a specific topic, and then are led through a process of creating action plans so that we can all have a personal stake in doing the work of racial justice in our lives. We just hosted our first virtual It's Time to Act event last week. It was a conversation about systemic inequities in our society, how they're magnified during times of crisis, and some of the racism and xenophobia that has happened in light of COVID-19. Our Vice President for Racial Justice and Public Policy, Ruben Vasquez, had a conversation with Minnesota's Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, about it. We're going to feature a clip of that conversation here now so you can learn a little bit more about how our mission and our work melds perfectly with public policy in our state.
Can you talk a little bit about the census and the importance of the census, particularly given the situation we are in right now, and you know, the programs, the social support, everything that we've talked about, and why is it so critical for communities to really be engaged in the census?
So I am a self-proclaimed census nerd. I love the census. 10 years ago when we had the census and I was still working at Wellstone Action, my job for a year was to go out and train nonprofit organizations, particularly in Indian country, but also in communities of color, on how to do civic engagement campaigns around the census. I love it. And part of the reason why I love it is because, like, you have to see me. And I think, you know, right now, as we are talking about how our communities are being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, I can't think of a better example as to why it is critical that we know who lives in our community and where we need to make investments. You know, for every person who fills out the census, that's $2,800 per year for our state. So over, you know, 10 years, that's $28,000. And so that matters. And this is the place where, regardless of status, if you are, you know, under the age of 18, like, you can participate in the census, and we need everybody to. This is babies and kiddos and teens and elders. Everyone in your home needs to be counted. And it is just so critical. When we got our census form, or our notice to fill out the census, we went online, and my daughter and I did it together. The same way that we go to vote, like, I hoist her up on my hip and we talk about who we're voting for and why. We filled out the census together as a family. And again, my community, the Native community, was the most undercounted community 10 years ago. we certainly in this moment cannot afford that. And Minnesota is changing, and the face of Minnesota is changing. We are becoming more diverse, and I want to make sure that our census accurately reflects the community that we have here in Minnesota, and that's why it's so important for people to fill it out. And I know that you can feel my nerdy passion coming through like through the screen, but more than anything, I think it is just based in like we need to be seen and heard and valued. And the census is one of the clearest ways for the federal government to know that we exist.
As you can see from the clip, in recent weeks, we've witnessed our systems not having been set up to support everyone equally, especially in a crisis. Now more than ever, all of us have been relying on the social support systems in place that communities always rely on when things aren't going well. The systemic part of our work to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all in our community happens through public policy work. YWCA Minneapolis has long been a resource and an advocate for the community in this way. One of the most timely ways that you can be involved in public policy right now, and especially this year, is by filling out the 2020 census. The census is what influences how much representation we get at state and local and federal levels, including Congress, voting on all the stimulus and other relief packages that are helping our communities right now. It's also what determines the amounts of federal funding that we get in our state for community-specific programs and for things like CHIP, Children's Health Insurance. To demystify this process, I thought we could fill out the census together right now. You can do it from your phone or computer. You can also call in and do it on the phone with a person. And there are language guides available online. But just to answer any questions that you might have, we're going to walk through it now. So the first thing you want to go to do is go to 2020census.gov or my2020census.gov. It should bring up this Shape Your Future page, and we're going to click the green respond button. Then it'll bring you to a page where you start the questionnaire. There are options to select other languages if you do this on a computer. And when you click Start Questionnaire, you'll see this page that talks about a 12-digit census ID. This is where you might look back to something you've gotten from the Census Bureau in the mail that will have a specific ID that's assigned to your household, and you can put it in here. If you haven't seen anything in the mailbox from the census, or you recycled it, or you don't remember it, you'll click this link at the bottom that says, I don't have a census ID. So the first thing the census is going to ask is where you were living. The goal of the census is to count everyone who resides in the United States, anyone residing here, not US citizens, and there is no citizenship question on the census this year at all, despite news earlier in 2019. So you'll say wherever you were living on April 1st, 2020, just a few weeks ago. The next section is going to ask you for a street address. So you'll type in where you live. You can also select that you don't have a street address. You'll click through the arrows at the bottom and it'll continue to ask you questions. If you live with other people, you'll go through person 1, person 2, person 3, up to however many people are in your household. So if you live with your family, if you live with roommates, you'll all do one form together. If you end up doing separate forms, it's okay. They deduplicate it at the Bureau, but you can sit down together and have a little census filling out party. You'll also want to be sure that you count kids that you have, especially and including newborn babies and kids under 5. In 2010, there was a huge miscount of children under 5, largely including in families who had filled out the census, but just hadn't counted their youngest kiddos. And that then affected money going towards children's programming. It is possible to submit the census without having filled out every single question. It will allow you to do that. Just know that if you fill out an incomplete census, you might get a follow-up phone call or visit from someone from the Census Bureau. So in about 10 minutes, I've filled out my name, my address, any others living in my household, my race and ethnicity, and then some other contact information. So once you've clicked through to the end, you'll submit, and then in 10 minutes, you've completed a great civic duty that's really going to help out our state to keep our seats in Congress, to keep funding up to $2,800 per person per year in Minnesota. for the programs that we know, love, and rely on all the time, and especially right now. So thank you so much for your civic engagement. If you have more questions, you can look at YWCA Minneapolis, Our Voices blog for a blog post about the census that links to a video that might answer other questions that you or your friends may have. If you ever have any questions about the census, elections and voter registration, legislation at all levels, and how to be an advocate for our mission and other things you care about, you can feel free to reach out to us at pubpaul@ywcampls.org. Now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Ruthie, who will tell you a little bit more about the work in our department.
Hi, my name is Ruthie Johnson, and I'm the Racial Justice Consulting Manager with the Racial Justice Public Policy Team. As Luna mentioned, there are several ways you can be engaged and join in our mission to eliminate racism and empower women. One of the ways you can engage in that work is through our Include consulting services. Through Include, we offer individual and organizational assessments. We offer trainings, policy review, and other customized services to help your organizations and groups embed equity in your work. Maybe your organization has some high-level policies around inclusion that you aren't sure how they apply to your team or department. Or maybe you're feeling like the equity work you're already engaged in isn't as relevant as you'd like it to be. Our services can help you bridge that gap, and we're open to working with organizations across all sectors. We offer a free initial consultation, which you can sign up for on our website by clicking on the Include tab.